on really for at least 2 years with our partners at Crossroads, the American Revolution. And these are two frameworks that we are going to use to guide us through this planning and execution of programs related to the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, which we in New Jersey are calling Revolution NJ. So Mark has, I think, started the recording. So we just want to make sure you all know we are going to record this session from this point forward so that we can post it and share with others who are not able to be with us today. So Mark, should we get started with the ubiquitous PowerPoint?
I will share my screen right now.
Awesome, thank you.
All right.
So yes, our goal today is to introduce you to this initiative. We've actually been working together on it for at least 2 years. And we want to share with you some of the good work that we've been doing. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is Revolution NJ. We're going to give you an overview of our strategic framework, basically encompassing the mission and goals for this initiative. And then Mark's going to take you through our interpretive framework, which is intended to be a guide for all of us as we think about programs and initiatives that we would like to develop to mark this anniversary. And then finally, we're going to end by giving you some examples of how you can use these tools to create programming. And then we're going to leave ample time, I promise, at the end for your questions and the answers that hopefully we can come up with. Now, as I mentioned, we've been working at this for several years so far, because in 2018, New Jersey passed legislation that assigned the New Jersey Historical Commission to begin planning for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. So Revolution NJ is a partnership that is actually specified in that legislation between New Jersey Historical Commission, a division of the Department of State here, so we are a state government entity, and our nonprofit partner, Crossroads, the American Revolution Association. And Crossroads, for those of you who are not familiar with them, they are the terrific stewards of New Jersey's National Heritage Area, which is the only one, I believe, in the United States that is exclusively focused on the history of the American Revolution in New Jersey. Now, I want to, at this point, pause a moment to just emphasize that the American Revolution and the 250th anniversary of that is certainly the impetus and the starting point for everything that we're doing. However, I want to note that in the national legislation that created the U.S. Commission for the Semi-Quincentennial, or 250th, it calls upon all of us to not just examine the events of the American Revolution, but in fact, the whole 250 years of American history. So what we've done here is to develop a framework that we hope will be useful to all of us in exploring various parts of that 250-year span, but also using other disciplines to use these themes. So we hope that arts organizations, as you can see in the last point here, we hope that history organizations, schools, civic groups, counties, municipalities, Girl Scout troops, civic organizations, we hope that all kinds of organizations can use these themes and concepts to develop exciting programming that will mark this anniversary. Good. I think I hit those marks there, Mark. We can carry on. So 2 years ago, the Crossroads of the American Revolution and New Jersey Historical Commission leadership met, actually June 2 years ago, and we began this process of trying to figure out, hey, what are our goals for this? What do we want to do together to mark this anniversary? So we met, we had a great meeting, and we envisioned a series of goals and priorities for what we wanted to do together. But we didn't stop there. We took those goals and we held a series of listening sessions all around the state, in person at that point, with different communities in different parts of New Jersey. And we got lots of feedback. We wanted to know what those groups thought about our goals and priorities and get their input into them. It was extremely illuminating, and Mark's going to share with you a little bit later some of the key findings from those. And we took that input and we used it to refine and further develop our goals and priorities. And this strategic framework, which we're going to show you some highlights for right now, it highlights the key areas where we hope to have impact. And you can see that it's going to touch on areas of scholarship, K-12 education, heritage tourism, and funding. So lots of different areas that we identified that we wanted to impact. And we know that this is ambitious. What we have in mind here, it's an ambitious endeavor that we've embarked upon. And we also know that we're open to respond and be flexible as these years progress. We continue to do outreach to different communities, and we continue to invite input from New Jerseyans all around the state. So here's the mission statement that we came up with after all of that visioning and then that listening to different communities around New Jersey. Eliciting from them what they hope to see happen in this anniversary. So Revolution NJ will advance the role that history plays in public discourse, community engagement, education, tourism, and scholarship in New Jersey. Through a series of initiatives that explore the history of the American Revolution, its context, and its legacy, Revolution NJ will galvanize diverse audiences statewide into embracing the enduring value and relevance of history. So that's our overall mission. And these are the 6 goals that we've articulated for Revolution NJ. The number 1 goal is to tell a diverse and inclusive story about America's past. We know that New Jersey is and was a very diverse place 250 years ago, just as it is today. And we want to tell an inclusive story of all New Jerseyans and the roles that they played throughout that span of history. Number 2, we want to encourage the growth and organizational capacity of New Jersey's history organizations. I want to tell you that goal was one that really evolved very much out of feedback that we got from listening sessions. Number 3, we want to promote heritage tourism in and to New Jersey, because we know how critical heritage tourism is, not just to our economy, but also to the development of our communities statewide. Goal 4, elevate the place of the value placed on history education in our K-12 schools and universities. Really important goal for us. And goal 5, demonstrate how understanding the complexity of our history helps us to respond to the present and prepare to the future, for the future. And that goal is particularly critical because so many Americans and New Jerseyans haven't been exposed to the full complexity of our past, which is so critical to our understanding now and tomorrow. And then finally, our goal 6 is to increase public and private funding for history in New Jersey. And I want to just one final comment on these goals. The National Semi-Quincentennial Commission, its goals, which by the way is now known as America 250, its goals are to educate, engage, and unite. So we also feel that our goals here for Revolution NJ complement those at the national level very nicely. So this handy dandy document that you see here in print far too small to read is our 2-page summary of this strategic framework. It is now on the websites of both Crossroads and the New Jersey Historical Commission. So if you want to find a quick reference that summarizes what I just reviewed with you very quickly, I invite you to take a look at that. There are also, the full strategic framework is also there. Should you want to plow through all of it, you are most welcome to. And we hope that this will be a great foundation for all of us to use as we move forward. And now I'm going to hand off to Mark Lawrence, who's going to walk us through the interpretive framework for Revolution NJ.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, we have 6 broader goals. And in order to meet those goals, we were working on an interpretive framework that sort of builds on everything that was mentioned in our strategic summary. And the idea of these interpretive frameworks is that it's a tool to guide you in how you develop programming. And it's going to be something that helps in layering different takeaways, programming narratives, the types of stories you tell, and also the types of assets that you're creating to engage the public with. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list, and similar to our strategic goal, it will grow if we see that there is topics or things that folks might want to include. So in that way, it's more of a foundation for making sure that folks who want to take part in the broader Revolution NJ have the same sort of basis and the same sort of ideas to work off of in sort of engaging their own programming. And it's meant to be used by groups all over the state of New Jersey, right? So we're thinking of not only just sites that are larger, have a bigger infrastructure, but also smaller volunteer-based organizations. And we want to work with folks to make sure that they're able to use this in a manner that makes the most sense for them without also overburdening them. So in that way, we're going to be hosting professional development sessions after our rollouts today. Those professional development sessions are going to be sometime during the summer and into the fall. So please stay tuned to listening to more about those opportunities. Going back to the framework though, it was something that was created through multiple engagement points. We listened to a lot of what the public was saying about historical sites in general. Then we also convened a scholar summit and tried to understand what the current academic discourse is about celebrating or commemorating the 250th. And then we also have our own organizational structure in Revolution NJ, which has an advisory council that helps with the feedback and direction of the interpretive framework. All of these avenues of engagement were sort of utilized together to create what you're going to look at today. So I want to first jump back into the community feedback that we received, because I think this is super important to understand why the interpretive framework took the direction that it did. So these are 10 key takeaways from our earlier listening sessions with diverse communities across New Jersey. We met with various groups and organizations, members from different identifying communities, to sort of understand why they do not engage with historic sites. And also just to really understand what their framework is when it comes to being able to go to a site, enjoy themselves, and see their story at these sites. And what we noticed here was that folks do have a wide variety of knowledge when it comes to the American Revolution and to American history in general. And because of that, we need to create programming that meets people where they are. Being that our communities have been diverse and will continue to be diverse, we need to make sure that there's different stories and experiences that are being told at sites. We want to make sure that our efforts are relevant to all constituents in the state. And this also ties into some of the things we were hearing about what people actually like when they do visit sites. There's a huge interpretive angle, that people love to hear stories that are sort of hidden in modern or dominant histories, but they also really like the interactive component. And we noticed that all of this is super important to the public, but we also know that historic sites and organizations have limited means when it comes to creating this type of programming. So part of this larger RNJ initiative and the interpretive framework is helping folks build the capacity to meet the public needs. And we're hoping that by doing this, we're able to create new audiences for history. And then at the same time, this will create a larger heritage tourism economic model that can help promote New Jersey as a historic destination. As you can probably tell, this is not supposed to end with 2026. We're hoping that this lasts and moves forward in New Jersey's heritage infrastructure. And we're hoping that this is an opportunity for us to really start developing New Jersey history and the infrastructure. At the same time, we had the Scholar Summit, which allowed us to talk to various scholars in the field about what history in the revolutionary era looks like today. And what we were hearing a lot of is that it's moved beyond looking at generals and battles. Although very important to the period, there's now a greater focus on looking at those stories, those hidden narratives that really talk about the day-to-day experience of living during this time period. They're exploring stories of underrepresented people, exploring bigger ideas of property and sovereignty, sociocultural complexities, right? And how to view this era in a global context. Within this larger focus is really just turning the inquiry in on itself and trying to understand what is the process of creating history, what is the process of writing a narrative, who gets to tell that story, what kind of form does it take? And we're really trying to grapple with that kind of idea too. What is it about the interpretive choices that we make that bring in people or might push people away? What kind of sources are people looking at? So this larger question about what type of history is being conducted is also relevant to scholarship today. And I think this really pushes folks to look at history away from a binary of good versus bad and really grapple with the complexity of it. If you were at our earlier session, we had an earlier meeting this year, quarterly meeting with Dr. Eileen Kaime Cheng, who talked about the broader political conversations going on between loyalists and patriots and all the different complexities people had to grapple with on a day-to-day basis when they're trying to understand this larger revolution moment. We're hoping that those kind of complexities are what people dive into when they use this interpretive framework. That, you know, we can see history, and this last point in the slide here, to see history as a way to foster equity and justice. We're looking at this from a larger civic engagement point of view, and hoping that this type of interpretive framework really changes the way history is being done in the state. So let me walk through a little bit of the interpretive framework and how we are hoping folks will use it. Like I mentioned earlier, it's supposed to be a rough guide that helps you sort of conceptualize different types of questions and take into a lot of different considerations when you're creating your programming at the site. What the key three elements are: there's guiding questions, and then there's key themes, and then there's the takeaways that you're hoping your audience walks away with. And as I mentioned, this isn't exhaustive. There's plenty of themes that aren't touched on here that you can include if you find that it's within the general idea of what we're talking about and you feel like it's missing. You definitely feel free to include it, right? It's not supposed to be a restrictive thing. It's supposed to help you inspire you to create something that makes the most sense for your organization. There's three tools that we're going to be using. They're all the same, but they're just differently, they have a different expression for how they can be used. We have one that's more of a diagram, which looks like this, where you can walk through from the past to the future, different stages of inquiry when it comes to what is the American Revolution. And it has the user kind of reflect on different moments of that process of trying to understand the past. And it has a short summary of the key themes on the bottom. And then our second table does the same exact thing, but it's done in a different format, as you can see, where you have your guiding questions on the left with a little bit of more probing into what is that question really trying to ask of the person using the table. And then you have a larger summary of the key themes on the right. The third tool is our interpretive outline. This really gets into the key themes themselves. And this is a very text-heavy tool where you will read paragraphs about the types of themes and get a better idea of what's going on within that theme. This sounds like a lot, and we know, so we've created a one-pager which allows someone to look at all of this through a really quick process of going through those 3 stages of looking at the guiding questions, filtering it through the key themes, and then creating a learning objective. So the ideal way of using this would be to take the guiding questions, take your topic through the guiding questions, and ask yourself only the questions that would make the most sense to ask of in this moment. So if we did something like inclusion and exclusion and trying to understand that perspective throughout the 250 years of the United States, you can start with the first question and ask yourself, was the American Revolution really revolutionary? Who was it revolutionary for? Who gained freedom? Who did not gain freedom, right? And then obviously the logical next question would be, who did it include and exclude? And then you can move your way down a little bit towards the middle part where it says, how do we know what we know about the past? And start asking yourself the questions about inclusion and exclusion through that particular lens. The idea of using the guiding questions is to make sure that you're taking this larger, big concept view of the particular topic you're exploring. The key themes are the ones that sort of bring more focus to it. So if you wanted to really jump into certain ideas that you see here, like nationhood and land and water, which would be under a property and sovereignty theme, you would be able to ask those previous questions using those larger guiding themes. And our hope is that once you put your sort of programming through this guide, that you'll be able to engage the audience in a number of different ways. Part of the goals of creating this interpretive framework is to make sure that the public walks away with a better understanding of what happened during the Revolutionary era, and then in the 250 years following it. The key point here is that we're looking at the revolution as a starting point, and then seeing some of these ideas and key themes that are discussed during that era, seeing how those effectively transform and express themselves throughout the 250 years afterwards. So if you're not a Revolutionary era site, your organization can still use this framework because there is all of these themes and ideas that, because of that moment in the founding of the US, it has reverberations throughout history. And you can find yourself connecting from the founding of the nation to the today and the present, and then hopefully to the future. And folks, by doing that process, will be able to identify who's included and who's excluded in all of these ideas and questions of the revolution. And you're able to do this connection, right? The whole point of the framework is to really have you to look at the past, the present, and the future as not separate entities, but things that are intertwined together. And it's our hope that through that kind of connection that people start to understand historical narratives from a more critical perspective, in which that they can sort of interrogate what they've learned about the past and sort of interrogate what they know about the present too. And this is our opportunity really to have folks recognize, or not recognize, but really grapple with the idea of what does it mean to commemorate something, or what does it mean to understand a particular origin myth. And part of this large process, once again, is to really use this framework to create a civically engaged public. Our hope is that folks are able to have a reflexive understanding of the past and the present for the future. So I know that's a lot. I'm going to switch gears a little bit right now and kind of provide a case study of what this might look like if you were to use this as an organization. So the case study we're having here is a historic house museum from the Revolutionary period. They want to update their exhibits to include a history of enslaved people that lived in the state. They know they want to do this, but they don't know where to start, or they don't even know how to tell the story. And they're worried that they might not get it right. So what they do, they take the interpretive tool, as I mentioned earlier, they take the concept diagram, which is sort of the easier way to look at it quickly, identify a couple of places where they know that when they do this type of programming, they're going to have to grapple with these particular questions. And they'll know, based on using tool 2, that there's particular things you should take into consideration when you ask yourself these questions. So for example, if they ask themselves, who did the revolution include or exclude? They might have a thought process like this. My site does not focus well on exclusion. It is currently focused on General So-So and his family, but makes no mention of the enslaved people living on the property. And for how do we know what we know about the past, finding out about enslaved people at the site was a real shock during last year's archaeological dig. We always had a suspicion that there was more to the story than we originally thought. I wonder if there's anything in the archives about this. So you have, in this case study, folks walking through these different questions and then really asking themselves different things to think about when they're considering putting in this programming. And the interpretive tool number 3 is their opportunity to really dive into the particular key themes that they've identified. So when they're talking about enslaved narratives, they're going to have to look at exclusion and inclusion, the movement of people, and also the historical process, right? How did it get to the point that this particular site didn't talk about the narratives of enslaved folks? Was there a reason, a past curator who perhaps did not think it was important? Did they inherit a particular program that they just did not want to change, or maybe felt like it wasn't important? Or was it the case, as I mentioned, was it because an archaeological dig kind of forced this narrative to come to the forefront? They're able to look at these themes and then jump into the guiding perspectives and the key themes in the first 2 tools to be able to really grapple with it. And we're hoping that this is not just going to be used by revolutionary sites or historic sites. We're hoping that these larger key themes and the ideas that come from the founding of the nation are interrogated through a different number of avenues. Specifically, we're looking at arts organizations who, in this particular case study, can create a broader series of performances that can talk to ideas of revolution. Right? So pretend in this particular example, they wanted to create this larger arts program where revolutionary ideals are being discussed and interrogated. And they identified these particular questions as being important to them, really grappling with the idea of what is liberty, what is freedom, what are these larger notions mean? So instead of focusing on how do we know what we know about the past, they might ask themselves, how does someone know they're living in a revolutionary moment? Or why is it important to learn about the American Revolution? Or why commemorate the 250th anniversary, and what does it mean to me? We're hoping that this tool, as I mentioned earlier, isn't going to constrict people, but open them up to start thinking about different questions, right? So in this particular case study, they might identify those larger themes that we list in tool 3 for revolutionary ideas, those themes and topics being liberty, pursuing happiness, equality, justice, and self-determination. They might approach those and be like, wow, that would be a great host of topics to create programming about. And I would love to see what types of interpretations artists might want to bring to those types of ideas, right? So you would create a particular program submission process that takes into account these larger questions from the interpretive framework and shape the program submission process, right? You want to call attention to the topics and the themes and use an interpretive guide to make sure that if you're creating something that's going to be used for our the 250th, that you're going to be asking questions about the past, the present, and future. And your focus might be more on the present and the future, using the past sort of as an influence into exploring these larger themes. And in both case studies, after using these frameworks, the product that they create will be able to let them focus on the RNJ interpretive themes. And by doing so, they'll be able to meet the larger strategic goals of the RNJ initiative. And I know that this is a lot, right? And I mentioned earlier that we don't want to be putting additional burdens onto people. So because of that, we're really working closely with folks on not only providing professional development, but also just making ourselves available to any questions or concerns if folks want to reach out and talk to us. The professional development workshops, well, if any of these ideas seem like really far-fetched or out there, they're meant to bring everyone to the same house, right? It's supposed to bring everyone to the same foundation and knowledge point so that you could work from the same basis. And these are going to be sort of in this tiered structure, right? Where we'll have the first tier be these larger, big questions. We'll start with what is the American Revolution really, right? And have folks be able to look at the different ways in which the American Revolution is being understood today. And then we'll get into the larger questions of, you know, why is there such a focus on identity? What is it about the historical process that lets us know what we know about the past? We'll get into these larger questions, and then the second tier will be a more pointed exploration of the themes that we listed. So those would be webinars that would help folks really jump into the themes that we were discussing earlier. And then the last part of the three-tier system would be hands-on workshops where folks could actually work together with a professional that we bring in that can help them start thinking about implementing the programs that they would like. And with that, I will stop sharing the screen and opening it up to Q&As. We're really excited to hear what folks have to say.